There are moments in life when change knocks softly and we pretend not to hear it. Not because we don't feel it, but because courage asks us to leave what is familiar, even when it hurts us quietly. This is a story about that moment. The moment when holding on becomes heavier than letting go. The moment when fear disguises itself as comfort. And the moment when courage is no longer loud or dramatic, but gentle, honest, and deeply human. This story is about change. Not the kind that happens overnight, but the kind that reshapes a soul one small decision at a time. In a quiet town shaped by passing trains and forgotten dreams, there lived a man named Elias Moreau, a traveler who had stopped moving, even though his life kept asking him to begin again. Elias Moreau lived a life that looked finished, not complete, just neatly closed, like a book no one planned to reopen. Every morning began the same way. The kettle whistled at precisely the same minute. The window beside the sink framed the same stretch of road where trains passed without stopping. Elias would watch them in silence, holding his mug with both hands, as if warmth could travel upward and reach the places in him that had gone cold. To anyone else, his life appeared calm, predictable, safe. He had work that paid the bills, a small apartment with clean floors and unmarked walls, evenings that ended early, mornings that started on time. Nothing was wrong, at least nothing that could be easily explained. But courage, he believed, was for other people, for those who wanted more, for those who were willing to risk losing what they already had. Elias told himself he was content. He had learned how to say that word convincingly. Content. It sounded mature, responsible, final. And yet every time he said it, something inside him leaned away from the truth. He once dreamed of traveling, really traveling. Not moving between places, but moving towards something meaningful. A purpose that felt alive. But dreams, he decided long ago, were dangerous. They asked questions his life was not prepared to answer, so he chose routine instead. Routine did not ask. Routine did not disappoint. At night, when the town grew quiet, Elias would sit by the window again. The trains were louder then, their rhythm steady, confident. They moved without hesitation, carrying strangers towards destinations that mattered to them. He wondered what it felt like to be certain enough to leave. Fear wore many disguises in Elias's life. It looked like responsibility. It sounded like logic. It felt like wisdom. Change is risky, he would tell himself. Stability is strength. But deep down he knew the truth he avoided. He wasn't choosing peace. He was choosing comfort over courage, and comfort, while gentle at first, has a quiet way of shrinking the soul. There were moments, small, uninvited moments, when courage whispered to him. In the pause before sleep, in the silence after laughter faded, in the way his chest tightened when someone spoke about starting over. These moments didn't shout. They simply asked, "Is this really all?" Elias never answered. Instead, he folded his days neatly and placed them back where they belonged. Tomorrow would look like today. Today looked like yesterday. And the future, well, the future could wait. But courage does not disappear when ignored. It waits, patient, persistent. And somewhere beneath Elias's carefully ordered life, something was beginning to stir. Not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind him that staying still was also a choice. And every choice has a cost. If courage felt like standing at the edge of something unknown, Then Elias believed discipline was its safer substitute. Discipline had rules. Courage had questions, and questions made him uneasy. So he leaned into effort. His days grew fuller, not richer, just fuller. He woke earlier. He planned meticulously. He tracked his time, his habits, his steps. Each task completed gave him a small, quiet satisfaction. A checkbox ticked, a list shortened, a sense of motion without the risk of direction. From the outside, it looked like progress. People noticed. They said things like, "You're doing well," and "You're so consistent," and "I admire your discipline." Elias nodded politely, absorbing their words like proof that he was moving forward. But movement, he would soon learn, is not the same as change. He told himself that courage was overrated, that slow, steady effort mattered more than bold decisions, that if he just kept improving the life he already had, fulfillment would eventually arrive on its own, quietly, without disruption. And for a while it almost worked. There were mornings when he felt lighter, evenings when the silence didn't press so hard against his chest. Small victories stacked neatly on top of one another, creating the illusion of growth. He was disciplined. He was responsible. He was doing everything right, except listening. Because every improvement Elias made was designed to protect the same life he was afraid to outgrow. He rearranged furniture but never changed rooms. He refined routines but never questioned their purpose. He polished the surface while the deeper questions waited patiently below. Sometimes, late at night, he would catch himself imagining a different version of his life. A version where he said yes instead of maybe, where he stepped forward instead of maintaining balance. Those thoughts scared him, not because they felt impossible, but because they felt true. So he buried them under productivity. Discipline became a shield. Busyness became a refuge. And progress became something he could measure without feeling. Yet something subtle began to crack. The more Elias succeeded at maintaining his life, the more distant he felt from it. Like a caretaker living in a house that no longer felt like home. He was efficient but disconnected, structured but restless. Courage kept knocking, not louder, just closer. It showed up as tension in his shoulders, as impatience with small talk, as a quiet sadness that arrived even on good days. These were not signs of failure, but Elias treated them as such. He worked harder, tighter, safer, but courage is not impressed by effort alone. It asks for honesty. It asks for risk. And beneath Elias's disciplined rise, a fragile truth waited to be revealed. You can climb very high and still be standing on the wrong wall. The illusion of progress can feel comforting until the moment it collapses, and that moment was already on its way. The fall did not arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, like most life-altering moments do. One ordinary afternoon, Elias received a message that unraveled the structure he had been so carefully maintaining. The job he depended on, the routine he trusted, the stability he believed was permanent, ended in a few brief sentences. No anger, no explanation that made it feel fair. Just a closing door where a hallway once existed. At first, he didn't feel anything. Shock has a way of numbing the body before the mind catches up. He sat at the small table by the window, watching the trains pass, and waited for panic to arrive. It didn't. What came instead was something heavier. Confusion wrapped in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had done everything right. He had been disciplined, careful, predictable. Failure wasn't part of the plan. Hours passed, then days. The silence in his apartment grew louder. Time, once neatly divided, now stretched uncomfortably wide. Elias filled it with searching, emails, resumes, plans, anything to regain control. But beneath every action was a trembling realization he refused to name. The life he built could disappear, just like that. As the reality settled in, the emotions followed, not all at once, but in waves. Fear, shame, anger, a sharp grief for the version of himself who believed stability meant safety. He blamed himself first, then the world, then himself again. The hardest part wasn't the loss, it was the collapse of the belief system he had lived by. Discipline had not protected him. Effort had not guaranteed security. The ground beneath him, once solid, now felt uncertain. At night, sleep abandoned him. Thoughts raced without direction. The same question repeated, over and over, what now? But there were no answers, only echoes. Courage, once distant, now stood uncomfortably close. Because when everything breaks, you are left with only what is real. And Elias had spent years avoiding that moment, avoiding the deeper call, avoiding the risk of becoming more. Now the illusion was gone. Failure stripped him bare, not just of routine, but of identity. Who was he without the structure he relied on? Without the certainty he clung to? The world did not end, but the life he recognized did. And in that breaking, something undeniable emerged. The truth he had avoided was now unavoidable. Change was no longer a choice waiting politely at the door. It had arrived, uninvited, unavoidable, and deeply personal. This was not the end of Elias's journey, but it was the end of his resistance. When life falls apart, acceptance often comes last. Elias woke each morning with the same reflexive hope that yesterday had been a misunderstanding, that the message would reverse itself, that order would quietly return if he waited long enough. He moved through his days as if the rupture were temporary, as if reality might apologize for the inconvenience and restore what had been taken. He clung to the past with careful precision. He woke at the same hour, made the same coffee, sat in the same chair. These rituals were no longer habits, they were anchors, proof that something remained unchanged, proof that he still existed in a world that made sense. His mind replayed old conversations, old routines, old versions of himself. He analyzed them relentlessly, searching for the moment where things went wrong. If he could find it, maybe he could undo it. Maybe control could be reclaimed through memory. But memory is not a map forward. It is a place we visit when we are afraid to move. Elias told himself he was being practical, planning, reflecting, preparing. In truth, he was resisting the present, because the present asked something terrifying of him, to accept that what was gone would not return in the same form. So he held on, to the identity that once fit, to the certainty that once comforted him, to the belief that patience alone would restore the old world. Courage felt distant again, not because it had left, but because Elias refused to look at it directly. Courage meant letting go of what he could no longer carry, and letting go felt too much like surrender. The days blurred together, progress stalled, not because he lacked ability, but because his energy was tied to a past that no longer responded. He stood still while life quietly moved around him. And yet, holding on has a cost. It showed up as exhaustion without effort, as frustration without direction, as a heaviness that sleep could not lift. The more Elias resisted change, the more painful stillness became. Somewhere inside, a quiet truth formed, gentle but persistent. What you refuse to release will not release you. But he wasn't ready to hear it, because holding on felt like strength, and letting go felt like failure. So Elias stayed where he was, between what had been and what could be, not moving forward, not moving back, just waiting. And waiting, he would learn, is its own kind of pain. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of direction. For Elias, the days no longer had edges. Morning blended into afternoon. Afternoon slipped quietly into night. Without the structure he once depended on, time became something he endured rather than used. The clock still moved, but he did not move with it. Friends stopped calling as often, not out of cruelty, but because Elias had slowly learned how to disappear. He declined invitations with practiced ease. He said he was fine with the voice that asked no follow-up questions. Isolation became easier than explaining a pain he did not fully understand. Inside his apartment, the air felt heavier, not hostile, just indifferent. The walls witnessed his stillness without judgment. Some days passed without him speaking a single word. He didn't feel lonely in the dramatic sense. He felt erased. This was the lowest point. Not because everything was gone, but because nothing seemed to matter. Elias sat by the window again, watching the trains he once admired. They still passed, still moved forward. But now, instead of curiosity, he felt resentment. They reminded him of motion he no longer trusted. He questioned everything, his discipline, his past choices, his worth. Failure has a quiet cruelty. It doesn't scream accusations, it whispers doubts. It convinces you that you were never meant for more, that courage belongs to other people, that trying again would only lead to more loss. Some nights Elias lay awake, staring into darkness, wondering when exactly he had stopped believing in himself. There was no single moment, just a slow erosion, 1,000 small hesitations, a lifetime of choosing safety over truth. This was the silence before change becomes possible, the place where distraction no longer works, where pretending requires more energy than honesty. In that stillness, something unexpected happened. Elias began to feel, not panic, not urgency, but a strange clarity. When everything else was stripped away, he was left with a simple question he could no longer avoid. If nothing changes, can I live like this? The answer arrived without words. No. The silence had done its work. And though Elias did not yet know how to move forward, something inside him finally understood that staying where he was meant disappearing entirely. This was not the end. It was the pause before courage found a new shape. Courage rarely arrives as a grand revelation. More often, it enters quietly, disguised as an ordinary moment. One morning, unable to sit with the silence any longer, Elias stepped outside without a plan. No destination, no purpose, just movement. The air was cool, the kind that sharpens the senses without asking permission. His steps were slow, uncertain, as if his body remembered how to move before his mind agreed. He walked until the town thinned into something softer. Fewer buildings, more space between thoughts. That was where he noticed the old man. He sat on a bench near the tracks, feeding crumbs to the birds that gathered without fear. His posture was relaxed, unhurried. He did not look like someone waiting for something. He looked like someone who had already arrived. Elias almost passed him. then hesitated. Something about the stillness pulled him closer. They exchanged a simple greeting, nothing more. For a while, they sat in silence, two strangers sharing the same moment without explanation. The trains passed behind them, loud and fast, but the bench remained still. Finally, the old man spoke. "Funny thing about trains," he said gently. "They never ask if you're ready." Elias smiled, unsure why his chest tightened. The man continued, scattering another handful of crumbs. "They move because that's what they're built to do. Not because it's safe. Not because it's guaranteed. Just because staying still isn't an option." There was no lecture, no advice, just observation. Elias felt something shift. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. The words didn't tell him what to do. They simply reflected what he already knew. The old man stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "Courage isn't leaving without fear," he added. "It's realizing fear doesn't get the final say." And just like that, he walked away. No name exchanged, no lesson explained. But Elias remained seated, the truth settling slowly. Courage wasn't something he needed to summon all at once. It wasn't about knowing the outcome. It was about choosing to move, even when certainty was gone. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, Elias didn't feel pressured to fix his life. He felt invited to begin again, and that was enough. Rebirth never announces itself. It begins as a quiet decision no one else can see. Elias did not wake up transformed. There was no sudden clarity, no dramatic surge of motivation. What he felt instead was subtler, a loosening, as if something tight inside him had finally exhaled. He started small. He stopped forcing his mornings to resemble the past. He let the kettle boil when it boiled, let the day unfold without rigid structure. This wasn't laziness, it was honesty. Discipline, he realized, was not about control. It was about commitment to what mattered now, not what once did. He began to walk every day, not to escape, but to listen, to his thoughts, to his breath, to the quiet signals he had ignored for years. Movement became a conversation instead of a distraction. Acceptance did not feel like relief at first. It felt like grief. Grief for the life he tried to preserve. Grief for the years spent waiting to feel ready. Grief for the courage he postponed. But grief, when allowed, becomes healing. Elias wrote, not plans, not goals, but truths. Pages filled with unfinished sentences and honest questions. What did he want when no one was watching? What did peace feel like in his body? What kind of life asked for his presence instead of his protection? Some days, fear returned, loudly. It reminded him of past failure, of uncertainty, of the comfort he had lost. But now, fear no longer stopped him. It walked beside him, uninvited but no longer in control. This was courage in its truest form. Not dramatic, not fearless, but consistent. He applied for work that aligned with meaning, not just security. He said no when something felt wrong. Yes when something felt uncertain, but alive. Each choice was small. Together they formed a direction. Healing did not rush him. It trusted him. And slowly, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not confidence, not certainty, but alignment. His actions matched his values. His discipline served his purpose, not his fear. Rebirth wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about returning to who he had always been, before safety taught him to hide. And for the first time, moving forward did not feel like loss. It felt like honesty. Change is not proven in beginnings. It is proven in return. Just when Elias started to feel steady, The old patterns resurfaced, quietly, convincingly. Fear did not storm back into his life. It whispered. It reminded him how fragile progress could be, how quickly things once fell apart. An opportunity appeared, familiar, comfortable, safe. It looked like the life he used to live. Predictable income, clear rules, no risk of disappointment. The version of Elias who once equated safety with strength would have accepted without hesitation. The temptation was powerful, not because it was wrong, but because it was familiar. Elias felt the pull immediately, the relief of certainty, the comfort of knowing exactly who he would be, the quiet promise that he could stop trying so hard. This was the real test. Courage, he realized, was not about dramatic leaps anymore. It was about consistency, about choosing alignment again and again, even when the alternative felt easier. He sat with the decision longer than he wanted to. He listened to his body, the tightness in his chest, the heaviness that returned when he imagined retreating. These sensations were no longer enemies. They were guides. The old Elias would have called this hesitation weakness. The new Elias recognized it as wisdom. He declined the offer, not with anger, not with pride, with clarity. The fear didn't vanish, it lingered, questioned him, warned him of consequences. But fear no longer decided his future. Strength, Elias learned, wasn't loud resolve. It was quiet commitment. And with that choice, something fundamental changed. He trusted himself, not because he knew the outcome, but because he knew his direction. Transformation had moved beyond emotion. It had become practice. Peace did not arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, like light at the edge of morning. Elias noticed it in the smallest moments, in the way his breath no longer felt rushed, in how decisions came from clarity instead of fear, in the absence of that constant internal negotiation he once lived with. His life did not become perfect, it became honest. He found work that aligned with purpose rather than prestige. It asked more of his presence, less of his pretense. Some days were uncertain, others deeply fulfilling, but all of them felt real. The train still passed outside his window, but now they no longer stirred resentment or longing. They simply moved, just as he did. Different paths, same forward motion. Courage had reshaped itself into something quieter than he imagined. It lived in daily discipline, in self-respect, in the ability to let go without bitterness. Elias understood now. Change was never the enemy. Fear was. And fear, once faced, lost its power. He no longer chased transformation. He embodied it, not as a destination, but as a way of being. Each choice rooted in truth, each step guided by alignment. This was the new dawn, not dramatic, not loud, but deeply peaceful. A life built not on avoiding loss, but on embracing meaning. If you listen closely, every life leaves behind a map, not of places, but of choices. Elias's journey was never about losing everything. It was about losing the illusion that safety could replace purpose. He learned that discipline without meaning becomes a cage, that strength without courage becomes stagnation, and that holding on for too long can quietly cost us our future. Perhaps you see parts of yourself in him. Maybe you've built a life that looks stable but feels incomplete. Maybe failure has already visited you and stayed longer than expected. Or maybe change is knocking softly and you've been pretending not to hear it. Here is what this journey offers, if you're willing to receive it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move with it. Healing begins when you stop negotiating with the past. Discipline becomes powerful only when it serves your purpose. Letting go is not loss, it is alignment. Failure is not a verdict, it is a redirection. Peace comes from honesty, not certainty. Rebirth happens the moment you choose yourself again. Elias did not become extraordinary, he became whole. And that is available to you too. Your journey does not require perfection. It asks only for presence, for consistency, for the quiet bravery to begin again. Today, not someday. If this story spoke to you, let it stay with you. Share it with someone who may need it. And if you're walking this path right now, know this: you are not behind. You are becoming. Sometimes the most powerful change begins with a single, honest step forward. And that step is already within you.